Good afternoon. Welcome to Book Passage. Today, on this rainy day, perfect day for author conversation, my name is Allison Bainbridge, and it's my pleasure to introduce our author conversation, celebrating microdosing for health, healing, and enhanced performance, by pioneering psychedelic researcher James Fadiman and Jordan Gruber. The two have been close friends since the 1990s. This book is the first comprehensive book on microdosing, using new research and extensive reports from individuals to describe the possibilities of the practice, though much has been written on the subject. I think you'll find that this book answers a lot of questions. I have learned much about this new frontier, at least new in the iteration that it is now, the psychedelic work, from a friend of mine who's sitting right over there. And I've learned that this is a very small community, and so I think a lot of you know each other even in this room. She's been part of this community working to bring microdosing to those who can benefit. Microdosing is proven to be a safe and powerful approach, as I'm sure many of you know who are involved in this community, for a wide range of health conditions and enhanced performance. Together, James, the world's foremost microdosing researcher, and Jordan are partly responsible for modern microdosing's development and current popularity. Beyond exploring potential benefits, the authors thoughtfully address how microdosing can play a role in easing the transition away from traditional pharmaceuticals and in heightening personal awareness of one's environment and emotional patterns. And I think it's so interesting because this isn't something that a lot of us lay people outside the community know much about, moving away from traditional pharmaceuticals by microdosing. Oh, if you could please silence your cell phones. Thank you. Sorry, I should have announced that at the beginning. So this book, as I said, it answers hundreds of questions, blending extensive research with detailed personal accounts from contributors worldwide, and it provides wide-ranging microdosing history, research, and science. James has been professionally involved with psychedelics for over 60 years. He developed modern microdosing, including the use of protocols, specific dose ranges, and time off. Jordan has ghostwritten and edited over a dozen books in a wide variety of fields, including psychology, spirituality, finance, and personal development. I am really looking forward to this thoughtful conversation on a complex but extremely current and important topic. So please give a warm welcome to James and Jordan.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. If I say another word, do I get different lighting? Well, it is wonderful to be here. I was just saying to Jordan, we've been to a couple of bookstores, but you're different. Okay, and partly in the description of this is a small community, which it isn't, and partly because there's so many people I know here from parts of my life, including someone who just said, by the way, 40 years ago when we, and we did. And most of you have done too. Okay. Just a question. Is there anyone here who has no psychedelic experience? Okay, well.
4 people.
She's working on it.
Yeah. There is room. But in terms of, quote, that the community, just to give you a couple of numbers, if you go to Google, you can ask how many times a particular term has been searched. And if you look at microdosing through the years, 3 million last year, 3 million searches. And I thought, that's a really good number to start something like this with. Like, you're not alone. But the RAND Corporation, and the RAND Corporation is one of those groups which most of us only have negative feelings about, because most of their contracts are military. They did a study that said there were 8 million people who took psilocybin last year, and I assume they only mean the US. 4 million of those were microdosing. So we think it's really popular. And we also think that people need as much good information as possible. So we are here, and we spent the last few years writing this book, and it's very much writing, the metaphor is flying the plane while you're still building it. So up until several days after the last moment when we could put anything in, I was still putting stuff in because the information has kept coming. And I'll give you some of the information that isn't in the book probably while we do this. But the other question is, how many of you have not microdosed? Okay. Okay, that's great. I'm glad there's somebody. How many of you are microdosing now? Okay. Hey, you don't laugh at people. Okay? They're just ahead of you. Okay? So that little microcosm is worth noticing. Okay? The reason that I mention are you microdosing now, because that means that you understand that microdosing doesn't prevent you from doing your normal activities, such as having had lunch and driving here and parking and finding that the bathroom is in the next building and so forth. It is an enhancer of your system. And if your system is in good shape, it enhances your capacity to do better. If parts of your system are not in good shape, what we find in many, many cases, as you'll see in the book, it seems to help. So that's where we're starting. Now, I hate to kind of ask Jordan to do the hard work, but maybe it would be useful just very briefly to say both what a microdose is and what a microdose isn't. And the isn't is becoming more important as the word becomes, I'm looking for a synonym for bastardized. Yeah. Overused or taken off to be commercial. And I'm thinking of a new podcast called Microdosing, something either Microdosing Through Marriage or Microdosing Marriage or something like that.
Microdosing Your Marriage.
Yeah, Microdosing Your Marriage. And I don't recommend that. There are a lot of other things you can do in marriage that really work better. So, Mark.
Yeah, so I want to set a little bit of the historical context too. Keep in mind that Jim had been a professional psychedelic researcher for 45 years before microdosing caught his attention because of a conversation with Bob Fort. And so no one he knew at that point was interested in these very small doses. And so that was around 2010. 15 years later, the signal for microdosing, as instantiated in this book, is the strongest that it's ever been. We know a lot more now about what works for most people in terms of dose range, and we talk about protocols now, and we have an idea of what works. We know what the language wars are going to look like. The other day, I found out that the people in the DMT community are starting to talk about low-dose DMT instead of saying microdosing DMT, which made us happy because DMT doesn't really work for microdosing. So what a microdose is typically taking 1/10 to 1/20 of a full recreational dose of a classic psychedelic. So most of what we know about is LSD and psilocybin, although we do talk about other substances in the book as well. And it's also not just doing this once, it's doing this over a pattern of time that has a lot of time built in off. So with Jim's protocol, which is the best known, except perhaps the Stamets protocol, you take a microdose on day 1, and then on day 2 you're off, and then on day 3 you're off, and then on day 4 you're on again. This gives you the advantage of being able to really feel what you're feeling and learn to use it. And on the second day off, people often have the best day and they have the best sleep. So what Jim said before is also important, is that on a microdose, you're below the threshold. We used to use the term subperceptual, but it's not really true. Most people who are on a microdose know. It's very hard to blind psychedelics generally, and that's another thing that we may talk about. So with a microdose, you might be a little bit aware, but you're not going to have any visual distortions. You're not going to have any major changes of consciousness. You're not going to have any qualms about having your ordinary day. Typically, no one is going to know that you're on the microdose. You just kind of go about your day, and as Ayelet Waldman put it, you have a really good day and things work better. So because you're doing it at this very low level, you have plenty of time to see what your experience, and if, there's 2 general types of benefits we talk about. One is physical and mental health benefits, and the other is enhanced performance. And enhanced performance is anything from art and creativity and music and writing to sports and MMA and volleyball and long distance running, which we've been hearing about. And so it's a very wide range of benefits. And I'll give the mic back to Jim in a second after I say, well, there was a question that people were putting out to us, including David Nutt, a well-known professor in England, about, whenever I see something that's supposedly good for so many things, I'm going to naturally be suspicious and feel I'm being oversold and being hyped. But now we're coming to a different understanding of both why microdosing works functionally and biochemically, and also a better way of thinking about it.
We took David Nutt's quote. He was the drug czar of England for a while. He was fired because he was asked what are the major causes of death through pharmaceuticals, and he started with alcohol and tobacco, and they fired him. So he then started specializing in psychedelics. But his comment was, if something is good for a lot of things, then I'm suspicious. We made that the headline of one of our chapters because we liked it so much. Because what he was saying is the model of contemporary medicine is as many fine divisions as possible, and that most pharmaceuticals are very symptom specific. Symptom specific means they tend to suppress a symptom, which means you have to take it every day because as soon as it's out of your body, the symptom says, well, I'm glad he's gone. That's a method of medicine, and it has some things work well, some things work poorly, like antidepressants. But there's a different way of looking at things, which is all of those symptoms are in one system, one very, very big, complicated system called the body. And what he was saying is there isn't anything that's good for everybody and for everything. And our comment was, well, it may not be good for everything, might be good for everybody, because there's an awful lot of similarity. And then I say now to people, well, is there anything that's good for everybody? And everyone goes, no, there isn't really. I say, how about exercise? Well, that's good for everybody. How about sleep? Well, that's good for everybody. How about eating better? Well, that's good for everybody. I said, what if microdosing was in that group? There's other things in that group. One is called vitamins. No one takes, a vitamin because your elbow is sore, where one ear hurts. They work on the whole system. So what we see, and we see it incredibly widely, is that microdosing apparently helps this work better. And while the word placebo is kind of negative because scientists say it messes up the data, if you redefine it correctly as the natural healing response, it is the incredibleness of the body that almost everything that we experience negatively, there's a system that helps heal it. Okay? So if we can encourage that system to function more effectively, it looks like the microdosing data. So that's the basics. Okay?
And so another thing to keep in mind is this contrast between pharmaceuticals and microdosing. Pharmaceuticals, as Jim says, are built to stop one specific symptom, and they'll do it however is necessary. If you look, for example, at the difference between how microdoses work with the serotonin system and how pharmaceuticals do, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, it's kind of like putting a wrench in the system to stop these things, it going back in so you have more of it. With microdoses, they're actually agonists that bond with the receptors and help them naturally produce the right amount. So it's healthy, and at the same time, it's not going to have the kind of negative effects. We don't like the term side effects. That's a marketing term. But it's not going to have all of the negative effects, and it's not going to be addictive. So it's a very different thing. And when we're talking about why microdoses work now, it's not that we don't have any idea scientifically. We know that microdoses produce an enhancement of neuroplasticity. and similar to macrodoses, but at a lower amplitude. We know that at least the classic microdoses have strong anti-inflammatory effects, which means you're going to feel better, and you're going to heal better, and you're going to perform better, and everything is going to be better. And we like to say also that there's a general return to equilibrium or homeostasis that's promoted by microdosing. So when you think about all of these kind of functional advantages in a way that isn't going in there like a pharmaceutical and messing with one thing specifically because we don't like it, you can see why microdosing is a lot gentler and has a much higher reward to risk ratio than pharmaceuticals generally.
So low risk is terrific. It's wonderful when people have said over the years, well, should I take LSD, meaning a high dose? You have to think about it. You know, this is not a, oh, sure, or don't take too much. Use music. Okay. But when people say, should I microdose for such and such, and say I don't have any information, my answer is probably you can try it. It's unlikely that you will have any negative effects, and if you do, stop, because it'll be not very much. And it may improve your situation, and if it doesn't improve your condition, then it may improve the way you feel about yourself and it. Let me mention one, for example, because we have one with both. Chronic pain. The reason that people go to the physician for physical problems, number one is pain. Because as you know, you can get pain for just endless a number of ways. And when people with chronic pain take microdoses, they give us two reports. One is on a pain scale. This is the way science works. They just ask your opinion, and then they call that a statistic. How is the pain on a scale of 1 to 10? You know, when you came in, it was an 8. Well, with microdosing, it's a 5. Terrific. How's your pain? Well, on a scale of, it was 7 or 8, and it still is. But it's now much more localized in my mind. I'm not in pain. My shoulder or my kidney are in pain. And that's a shift in how you live your life. Teacher many years ago was, never name yourself after a disease. You know, how are you? I'm a kidney patient. No, you're not. You're a person with a kidney that's not doing very well. So this is the range, and there are different reasons we think why. Chronic pain is a particularly fascinating one because I don't know if any of you have had this experience. You have something wrong, like a car accident, serious wrong, okay? And all the different parts are repaired, and the pain remains. Now, what we now know, it's a term. What's it called? It's kind of like kind of pain expansion, that your brain says, you may feel better, but I don't. And so I'm going to send pain signals back out to the area instead of where I'm getting them originally from the area. And what we see is a lot of, and the worst one is phantom pain. You know what phantom pain is? That you lose an arm and it still itches and hurts. And you can't do anything about it because there's nothing there. You will never guess what helps. Okay? One is, by the way, high doses. There's some interesting work going on, but also low doses. And in some way, it lets your brain know, I don't want to bring this up, but you know, your right arm has not been there for 18 months. You can stop having it hurt. And your brain says, oh my God, nobody told me. So we're dealing with some very interesting substances and some very interesting conditions. Now, and we're going to talk a little bit more, but mainly we want to take questions. One is, it's what you want to know. And two is, we want to know what you want to know, because either we're going to say, commercially, it's in the book, or we're going to say something different.
So before we get to your questions, Jim and I wrote another book in 2020. It was called Your Symphony of Selves, S-E-L-V-E-S, and those of you who are familiar with internal family systems, or IFS, it's similar, but our book is both a lot simpler and a lot more radical at the same time. And I bring this up because a third general category of the benefits, we talked about physical and mental health conditions, and we talked about enhanced performance. But a third benefit is that you get to see that you do have these different selves or subpersonalities more easily. And this relates to some of what we do know about how psychedelics work, in the sense that they turn down what's called the default mode network, which is the part of that you're normally in. If you're just kind of ruminating and thinking around, that's the part of you that you're in. But if your default mode network is so used to, that part of you that you're in is used to being in pain all the time, you essentially forget that you have other parts or other selves that enjoy being alive and enjoy being in your body. And so you have more ability when you are microdosing to see the different parts of who you are, and to be, as we put it in the book, to be in the right mind. Mental health is being in the right mind at the right time. So you can shift into the part of you that is not in pain. Or if we're talking about the performance angle, you can shift into the part of you that is really good at focusing down and maybe going into flow states and being your most creative or most, your best performing part of who you are. So you get more of a sense of your different selves when you're on psychedelics, certainly high doses as well as microdoses. And you also are better able to see that the people in your life have these different parts of who they are also. And when someone who you love and is close to you does something that's really annoying and real time, it's easier to be forgiving and to not really get stuck in it, because you know that's only a part of who they are. Or you can move yourself into the part of who you are that is more forgiving and more tolerant and just lets things go. So you see all three of these benefits: the physical and mental health conditions, the enhanced performance in both artistic and creative and physical and sports, and also this ability to have better communication with your own selves or subpersonalities, as well as see that in the people you're with.
So one of the things that we try and get past is almost all of the research, the high dose research, which is now called megadoses. They didn't have that term until we came up with microdoses, by the way. What you're looking at when you're looking at different sicknesses and illnesses, mental and illnesses, that's kind of easier to describe. But enhanced performance is a little more subtle. And so what we do, rather than, it's hard to measure, what we do is just ask people to report. And so over the years, I've maybe read 10,000 reports. And on one of our little studies, we had reports from 51 countries. There's a bigger study that has 81 countries. So we're pretty aware that people are aware worldwide of what we're talking about. And we have one group of enhanced performance, very straightforward. I used to get B's, now I get A's. Pretty straightforward. Another is I am much better at first drafts. Now, I have a subset of journalists who interview me, and I say, one of the possible uses is does better with first drafts. Now, that's really putting catnip in front of a journalist. And I've gotten a number of letters that said, yeah, you're right. and a number of them, usually college newspapers, write the story about their taking their first dose and how it improved this story. The other that's kind of interesting, because it's spreading very rapidly in terms of telling each other, is sports. Sports, as you know, is remarkably numerical, right? I'm always fascinated when I hear people say, discussing baseball, and they only speak numbers. If you didn't know what they're talking about, you'd think this is some kind of secret code.
Right.
But it's all statistics. Well, I'll just give you a couple of sports. One is martial arts, and my favorite quote is, I used to get silvers, I now get golds. Pretty straightforward. It's judging, you can tell. But the one that we recently got from Ben Greenfield, who some of you know, I've tried every possible physical technique and every supplement that's ever been made guy, and he has. He said he was interviewing someone who does long distance running. Long distance running is more than 26 miles. Some of you might think that's a long way, but they're the ultra marathoners. The ultramarathon community is now totally aware of and making full use of microdoses. And then Ben went into some very complicated reason why, if you're running 100 miles, how microdoses improve. And he made some guesses. So, but what it does is it increases the body's capacity to do what it intends to do. It increases the mind's capacity to do what it intends to do. Those are important things to keep in mind because that's what we've got. And to limit it to the notion of, you have to be sick in order to get better, which is the American medical model, and the U.S. government has no categories for wellness. That's why the supplements that you all use, and on the bottle it says, it's good for this, this, and this. And the U.S. government says that it isn't, because we can't tell you that it is. Because that's how the government handled wellness, is to say, we don't know what to say. So you can say anything you want, as long as it doesn't kill people or it doesn't kill them really fast.
And one of the things that's interesting is that we're seeing ways that microdosing could spread throughout culture. We don't make a lot of predictions in the book, but one of them that I make is that you will see people in every sport and every type of creative and aesthetic endeavor. There will be people at the cutting edge who will be playing with microdosing before too long, once they realize the general contours of why it works and how safe it is and those sort of things. But also in more serious conditions, let's say treatment-resistant depression, when you look at the reports we're getting and some of the studies that have been done, if you're going to take the perspective of start with the lowest impact thing that might help somebody that's safe, starting with microdosing is a lot safer and simpler and easier and less expensive than starting with high doses with a therapist, which is what was tried with MAPS and MDMA and PTSD, and that didn't work the first round. But generally speaking, microdosing seems capable of addressing a lot of things, and given that really high reward to risk ratio, when you think about 50,000 3 to 5 year olds in the United States are on Ritalin. It's okay, according to the government, for 3-year-olds to be on Ritalin, which we know is addictive. What if we weren't starting with Ritalin? What if we started with microdosing, and then if that doesn't work, or they can work at the same time, and just the caveat is if you are on, one of the things we call out in chapter 4, which is notable conditions, is that microdosing seems to be very good at helping people who decide they want to taper down or taper off of a pharmaceutical. So obviously you can never just switch one for the other. You have to work very carefully with your physician and taper at the schedule. But those who are microdosing are reporting that it's a lot easier to do that. So there's a lot of potential ways that microdosing could substantially change both the health and the performance landscape that we live in.
So if you look at our title page, it says that we wrote it plus hundreds of others. And our editor was kind of a little antsy on that one. And I said that really what we've done is take from these thousands of reports, stacks of reports, and make it available so people can come to their own conclusions. Now, I know some of you probably are unaware of this living up here, but actually psychedelics are not yet legal. Exactly. But I don't know if anyone is old enough to have lived through a prohibition when alcohol wasn't legal. Remember? You've read a little bit. What you don't know is when alcohol was fully illegal, the number of places where one could buy alcohol went up by about 300%.
And the strength of it.
Right, and we moved from a beer and wine and cider culture to hard liquor because if you're a smuggler, look at it sensibly. You want a case of beer or a nice 151 proof rum. So, but we find that nature doesn't know about our legal system. Particularly, I have talked to many mushrooms, and they all say, "What is this illegal?" And they looked at each other and said, "Yeah, da, da, da," and none of them have any idea what I'm talking about, right? 200 species of psilocybin containing mushrooms. Nature may have had an idea. And they said, it's looking pretty good. We better try this out all on every continent. So there's some interesting other kind of cultural issues. But I would like to see what happens if I say, are there any questions, and see what happens. And we can always pretend that we're going to ask the next question and cut you off, but we'll see. Now, this is something that I've actually taught a lot of very famous people. A question, this is something you weren't taught in school. A question is a single sentence with maybe a clause, and it ends with a little up of the voice. And in a psychedelic-oriented group, it never starts with, first I got to tell you about this experience I had. Okay? We did a podcast with a somewhat important person, and we were a little nervous because she didn't seem like our kind of person, and mainly what she wanted to tell us was about her high-dose experiences. Mm-hmm. And it was just fascinating trying to interrupt her.
Well, she
because
had to
here was
get
this
it out.
opportunity to talk about how great high doses were. So, okay, so you can't do that. Okay, I know some of you have already talked to me privately. It's okay. Okay, question.
Given that it's still not legal, even though the mushrooms don't know that,
Right.
how do those of us who might be interested access it? And sorry, one more question. I'll do the little up at the end.
Okay.
Okay. And also, what about people who can't afford it since it's not covered by the legal system?
Okay. Oh, let me do that one because I like the second one. High dose, you have a condition, you get into a study, your brother-in-law got you in because these studies are usually 5 to 100 times oversubscribed. And the cost of the treatment, which will be 1 or 2 sessions with 2 full-time trained mental health professionals and a nurse and in a clinical setting, and the total bill is maybe $8,000 to $15,000. Okay? If you, for instance, stayed afterwards and said, if someone would help me find a source in Marin, and the 4 or 5 people that came up to help you, and you said, well, but what's it going to cost? And they said, well, maybe $5 for maybe a month. Maybe, since this is Marin, $8. Right? And that doesn't include tax, and there isn't any tax. So one of the things that's very interesting about microdosing is because it's not commercialized, and nobody seems to have figured out that it's, there will be commercializations and will be all the awful same stuff, okay? Late stage capitalism is incredibly clever at preventing you from getting stuff. But right now, that's why it's nice to know that mushrooms are fine. So that I hope answers both of those questions. One, it is the cost of and actually, let me give you real cost. If you're a mushroom grower and you're selling wholesale to someone who wants to put them in capsules and sell them, I think 2 years ago it was like $2,000 a pound. That's 454 grams, and we're talking 1/10 of a gram for a dose. So it's not bad. 6 months ago it was 1,500, and now it's around 1,000. Competition. The reason is you can grow mushrooms in a drawer in your dresser. You have to have a little kit, but there's a drawer. So that's the kind of commercial side of it, which is right now there is no commercial market, and the going market in the Bay Area is crowded. So
let me answer your question a little more fully how we normally do. One way is that you can grow your own mushrooms. It's a little unclear in California if it's completely legal to buy the spores, but there doesn't seem to be any prosecution, and a lot of people grow mushrooms. Another thing you can do is locate your local psychedelic society or meetup group, and there's a lot of them online that you can find, and go and find people you trust, and you'll be able to find someone who will be able to help you. Another possibility is if you have younger people in your life, ask them because they're going to know where to buy drugs.
I thought you'd never ask that.
And then finally, there are a couple of substances that we talk about in the book that are actually fully legal and seem to work. One of them is the vine-only portion of ayahuasca. It's called Banisteriopsis caapi, and there's a group in Peru called Microdosing that's figured out a protocol, and you don't see a lot of it being sold, but you can find it, and it's legal, and it seems to work quite well. And we talk about a couple of other things in the book that are also, at least for now, legal. And we've had the experience pretty much that everybody who's really determined to find a source, if they're willing to meet people and maybe go to these meetup groups or societies, everybody seems to find a way if that's what they really want to